Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us in the Locher Room. I'm Alan Locher. Today, we're kicking off Mental Health Awareness Month with Brian Spitulnik, a psychotherapist based in New York City. Brian brings a wealth of expertise and compassion to the table, delving into the most pressing issues facing the LGBTQ plus community in 2024 and shedding light on why therapy can be beneficial for everyone. As the co-founder of Artists Reimagining Therapy and Systems, Brian leads a fully funded program providing free group and individual therapy to artists and arts workers. His commitment to helping individuals forge deeper connections with themselves and their surroundings, coupled with practical tools for behavioral change and emotional growth, underscores his transformative approach. Beyond his therapeutic practice, Brian's diverse talents shine through as a writer, dancer, and producer, and co-founder of 85th Street Productions. Prior to going full-time into private practice, he danced on Broadway for 15 years in the musical Chicago. Please help me welcome Brian Spitulnik to the Locher Room. Hey, Brian.
Hey, Alan. How are you?
Are you a little embarrassed at the intro there?
I am. I was taken aback.
That is you.
Yeah, it was all true. So yes, that is.
Well, thank you so much for being here during Mental Health Awareness. As I told you a few weeks ago, I became aware of you through your Instagram reels where you discuss issues affecting gay men and women. And I really love the take, that your approach on that. So
Thanks. It's a relatively new endeavor. When I went into psychotherapy, I didn't think it's such a private thing. Therapy is such a private thing between the therapist and the client that I never thought, oh, I should really get on Instagram and do this. But the more I realized, there's a lot of gray area out there. There's a lot of, in a more public way. Why not kind of pull back the curtain a little bit?
I was talking to a friend. We were doing this who was on Guiding Light, who has become a clinical therapist, family, and that stuff. And it is fascinating. There are so many people who are so just opposed to it. And I recently, I might have told you, I interviewed a Holocaust survivor who's in her 80s, who basically said to me, I wish I hadn't had been so stubborn for all these years.
I know. There's still a huge amount of stigma around seeking any kind of mental health care. And I was surprised to find, because I do come from the Broadway community, and I think of us as so progressive and liberal and, open and in our feelings in so many ways. I was really surprised by the resistance of the boys in my dressing room, who I thought, you could really use some therapy right now. Just, they were going through things, specific things, life things. And there was resistance to it. And it was, again, just that stigma and that idea that we should all be able to kind of pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. It's American individualism, it's a lot of things piled on top.
Well, I love that you said that about in the dressing room, but I do agree. I've always said to somebody who would bring therapy up, I do think it can help everyone if you just, and I don't know that I always did it correctly or and I know you've done some things on, what people think therapy is, but just being open and having someone to talk to about things that are affecting us, I think can help anybody.
I agree. I do agree.
In the fact that this is Mental Health Awareness Month, I looked it up the other day because I really didn't know where it began. And I was shocked that it started 75 years ago.
Did it really? I didn't know.
Yeah. By an organization called Mental Health America, which advances the mental health and well-being of all people living in the U.S. through public education, research, advocacy, and public policy and direct service.
Cool.
I had no idea.
I had no idea either.
Yeah, there's a website. So I'm curious for you, when did you first become aware of mental health?
That is a great question. I grew up in the suburbs of DC, in kind of a culture in which like you go to therapy if something is up. So it wasn't always such a foreign concept. And it was when I moved to New York, I had friends who were not going to therapists, but were going to coaches and people who were similar to therapists. So I started to seek that out very early on. And I didn't really know the difference between all the different ways that you could practice therapy. So it really was therapy that I was seeking. But I became aware of it, as something that I wanted to pursue pretty recently, really. I had been dancing in Chicago for years and years and years. And in the time that I was there, 3 different men in the company who were no longer in the company, who had been let go, they died. They died from overdose. They died from suicide. And that was heartbreaking, heart-wrenching, terrifying. And it was really when those 3 deaths accumulated. And I thought, I have to do something. First of all, I know I'm not going to dance forever. So there was that aspect of it. Like I know I have to find another life after this.
Your body was gonna.
It was gonna, either I was gonna leave or my body was gonna leave for me.
Yeah.
So there was that aspect of it. But I really became aware that there is an urgent need here for gay men and for artists. So for my community to have access to mental health care.
Was that sort of your first experience with people taking their own lives?
Yeah, it was. And I wish I could say it was just these 3 men who were in my company, but it wasn't, because then I started noticing it happening kind of in my periphery as well. People who I knew, friends of friends, and the common denominator was that these were all men over 40. And I was in my 30s. And so I saw that coming near, and I thought, what's going to happen? What's about to happen? That seems like a good option. That seems like the only option. So so much of my research in graduate school, so much of my master's thesis was about what is going on with gay men, specifically with gay men as we age. What happens to us in the community? How are we pushed out? How do we become invisible? And then, on the flip side, how do we not become invisible? How do we really form substantive and fulfilling lives for ourselves?
So interesting, because I think it, as a gay man who is, nearing 58, it's not just the age, and you and I were just talking backstage, but being unemployed. Yeah. I think it doesn't just hit the gay man or woman. It hits anybody at this age looking for a job. Becomes more difficult. Ageism is a huge thing on the job market, let alone in the LGBTQ plus community.
No, it's so true. I mean, there are so many studies about employment and mental health. Even if you hate your job, it's not great for your mental health, but it's actually better than being unemployed for long periods of time. And one big difference between a man who becomes unemployed, say he's a straight man and he's been employed his whole life and he has a family and a wife, and he kind of has all these traditional markers. Those markers can kind of serve as a container, whereas a gay man doesn't necessarily. Of course, gay men are married, gay men have children, but by and large, we don't. And by and large, those kind of traditional societal markers, we don't have them to fall back on. So so these men that I'm talking about specifically, they were in the arts, just notoriously an unstable career path. Mm-hmm. And I think for the majority of these men, it really is kind of, once the job is gone, the container is gone. So there are ways to get around that. There are ways to build a life.
Well, I notice now, I'm planning to do something, but every so often there's the panic sets in, and the fear.
Right.
But,
And not to make this your therapy session, but what does the panic say? What does the fear say?
I think it's interesting because I think it's the business side of what I want to do. I'm not familiar with that. I want to go into sort of a photo business, photography, and that type of stuff.
Yeah.
I'm familiar with. It's the unknown, I think, that I'm unfamiliar with, and the unknown, I think, is what scares all of us in many whatever career you're so choosing, for sure.
Absolutely. And one of the models of therapy that I practice is system-centered therapy. And whenever you find yourself going into the unknown, you're really on the edge of something. You're on the edge of the unknown. And the question to ask yourself is, what does it feel like? What does it actually feel like to be on the edge of the unknown? For most people, it's uncomfortable. Okay, so how does it feel to just sit in that discomfort? Or it's really scary. And then the question is, okay, what is the story that you're telling yourself that is so scary? So for you, it's unknown. And because it's unknown, it means that maybe there's a chance that you're going to go out and not know what you're talking about. And so people will look at you a certain way and you'll feel embarrassed, and there's fear of that embarrassment. And so if you really kind of play it out and you come back from it, where you actually are right now is, oh, I'm right here. I have this idea for a business. I actually know a lot. And I have everything I need to know to move forward right now. And so if you come back from the story, then it's not so scary, usually. Usually.
Well, I love that my story led, because that was going to be my question. What is your approach? How do you approach working with clients? And I was going to ask, because you mentioned this, you never thought you'd be on Instagram. Are you finding that you are getting clients that way? Because I think hearing how you speak, that is what drew me in. And I think that approach right there must make people sort of feel comfortable hearing what you have to say.
I've been surprised by the number of people who have reached out. It's been really nice. They get a sense for who I am, which usually with a therapist, you don't. You're kind of going in, it's like a blind date. You're going in blind.
Which is also scary for those who fear therapy to begin with. Finding the therapist and feeling comfortable is
it's a huge part of it. It's a huge barrier. It can be a huge barrier. So I've been really gratified that so many people have reached out, and I've started developing therapeutic relationships with them. It's been great. But what was the
your
question?
approach?
Oh, my approach. Yes. Okay. So I right now, therapy is one of those professions where you are continually learning, and that is one of the things that I love about it. First of all, you have to do continuing education credits to keep your license, all of that kind of stuff. But there's so much to learn. There's so much to absorb about all the different ways that you can help people, all the different things that make sense, all the different tools that you can have in your toolbox. So right now, what I'm using the system-centered therapy, which is what I discussed, especially with group work. I love group work. Group work is kind of like next level therapy to me, because when it's just you and I, when it's just one-on-one, it's great, but there's also a real safety built into that dynamic. Going into a group, there's also safety built in, but you're being forced to look at how you actually show up in the world and how other people react to you and how you react to other people in real time. So with systems work, you're really looking at yourself as part of a whole, and you're just looking at, what is my role? What role am I taking on? And what would happen if I didn't take that role on? Somebody else would probably take up that role. So systems work is always looking at the kind of living human system. And that can be, the system work is a system. You and I right now are a system. You and your husband are a system. And the group is a system. So there's that approach. And then on top of that, I also use internal family systems, which is another systems approach, but it's looking at your internal structure. So the whole idea is that we all have multiple parts within us. Everybody, when I start working with people, they often are saying, oh my God, do I have multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder? And the answer is no, usually. But we all have this. We all have, it's the same thing you would say, like, oh, part of me really wants to go to this movie, but a part of me just wants to stay home. Well, that's kind of the idea, is that we have all these parts and they're not always working together. Very often they're working against each other and against us. There is that you at the center of it that's observing all of it. So the model centers around the idea that you can be self-led, and all these parts, they're not going anywhere. They're not ever going to disappear. So instead, how can you work with them? How can you be in dialogue with them? How can you maybe ask them if they would like to take on a different job rather than that protecting job that they took on when you were 8 years old that is no longer relevant to your life? So those are the two modalities that I use.
Interesting. I did group almost 30 years ago for a brief period.
What did you think of it?
I liked it. It was scary. It was a sort of a difficult time for me, and the therapist had recommended it. But and the way you described it, it is how you are, interact with everybody in that room, and their, personalities. We all don't get along with everybody, so it's, I don't remember all of it, but I do remember, and people, even myself, probably people just being fearful to speak up at the beginning because it's such a new experience. Were you studying while dancing at the same time?
I was. I applied to graduate school. Well, rewind. I started dancing in Chicago in 2007. In 2009, I started graduate work at Columbia, getting a MFA in writing. And I was gonna, be a novelist and a essayist. So I got that degree, and it was wonderful. And I kept saying, okay, as soon as I make the same amount of money I'm making in Chicago through my writing, I'm going to leave Chicago. And I never made the same amount of money. And I wasn't making a fortune at Chicago. I was just making a living wage. But I was never making a living wage from writing. So fast forward to when all of this, my awareness of the need for mental health care kind of ballooned in the community. Then I started applying to graduate schools in social work, master's in social work programs in the fall of 2019. And then I was accepted to a bunch of schools in March of 2020. And then, what happened? The world fell apart. So I did the first year of my graduate work online in Utah, where I was living. And because all, the schools, I went to Hunter, which is here in the city. It's part of the CUNY system. And, but everybody was online. And so when Broadway reopened in 2021, I came back to Broadway and started my second year of the master's program in person. So I would be uptown on the Upper East Side, going to Hunter during the day, and then come right to the theater at night.
Crazy. Well, congrats. Bravo to you for doing it. When you go to school for something like this, I assume, do you learn a lot about yourself in the process? I mean, since you're listening to others and
oh my God, yes. I mean, yes, the answer is yes. First, they really make it not a requirement, but they strongly suggest anybody who's going to school to be a therapist, anybody who intends to be a therapist, you should also be in therapy. So I was very much doing that work. But then when I started seeing clients,
but it is a requirement. That I find that
it's not a requirement; it's a strong suggestion.
Okay.
Because they're not going to pay for it. It's not included in your tuition.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah,
of course not.
No, but it really should be. I mean, I don't think.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, you saying it makes complete sense.
You need somebody to have your own outlet, and separate from that, you need. This is also not a requirement, and not everybody does this. My license requires it, that you are supervised by someone. So you can bring your cases, bring your, what's happening with your clients to someone with more experience. I mean, to me, this makes perfect sense. And a lot of therapists have that for their whole careers. But in school, I was doing this research about gay men and about ageism in the gay community and about suicidality in the gay community. And one of my professors told me, oh, this is what we call me search. It's like you're searching for yourself. And I thought that was pithy and, true, very true. I was learning a lot about myself. Then I started seeing clients one-on-one in my internship. And I learned a lot. There were a lot of small and large things in my life that I found I couldn't lie to myself about anymore. One of which was that I was ready to leave performing after 15 years. That became abundantly clear. And a lot of that became clear because of the way I was working with clients, working with them through kind of transitioning into new stages of development, becoming who they are now versus who they had always been. So yeah, I learned quite a lot.
Yeah, I would assume that you kind of have to. Going back, well, first of all, we talked a little bit about the difficulties of finding a therapist. What's your piece of advice for someone looking?
That's a really good question. I think first and foremost are finances, the reality of your finances. If you have health insurance, and it's important to you to find someone within your network, or if you have out of network benefits, all that stuff, it's really important that you figure out what you can actually afford. And that's hard. It often means, unless you're just like, really very comfortable. But for a lot of people that I work with, it means you're having to make your mental health a priority, and having to look at where you cut back so you can do this thing. Because I see clients once a week, and I think for me, it's really important, especially for the first chunk of the work, to see each other once a week. So that's the first thing, is the financial aspect of it. The second piece of advice I have is really to treat it like dating, even though I don't know really what that means, except for like be open and go meet a lot of different people, because you really do want to feel like you click and that your therapist kind of gets you, and that you like being in the room with them, and that you feel good in the room with them. A lot of, mostly now I'm working with gay men. And a lot of them come in and say, I've been in therapy before. It was great. We did a lot of good work, but I didn't want to have to explain what the underwear party was anymore. I want to just be able to we don't have time. And that's like a funny way of saying it, but there is like some fundamental understanding of
things that we can speak to, a language.
Yeah, there's a language. Yeah, culturally, but also just internally. Our internal experience of living in the world is different. It is different from a straight woman who understands a lot of things but hasn't lived this. So that said, I also work with straight people and non-binary people and trans people. So there's no rule. There's no rule there that your therapist has to look like or have your lived experience. Not at all.
It's interesting because I did start with a woman, and I don't recall why, but then switched to somebody who was gay. Mm-hmm. That I definitely felt more comfortable with. Going back to the Instagram stories, where do the ideas and the topics you delve into come from?
Yeah, they come from my life. They come from my clients' lives. These are issues that are just always like popping around in my head, and have been for years and years and years. So I keep thinking I'm going to run out of topics, and I don't. I mean, there's so much to say. There's so much to discuss, and I know like these conversations are happening. I'm not the only person, but I do find that I think that when people do resonate with what I'm saying, when people do react, I mean, sometimes it's not a positive reaction. You should read these comments. Yeah,
because I would assume you're calling people out, really.
And that's not my intention.
You're not, but they're
They feel that way.
I
Yeah.
said it correctly.
No.
They're
But
seeing it or hearing it as if
yes.
you're.
And sometimes they say that in a funny way. Sometimes they'll say in a funny way, like, wow, you just attacked me, like, and they're being funny about it. But sometimes people will really take offense. If I did a post about, I can't remember, about ageism, I think. And some people felt really, really seen, is what they said. Like, thank you for expressing what I'm feeling as a 60-year-old gay man or man or whatever it was. And then there were people who were really upset that I hadn't included, what their experience was. And it was valid, because what they were saying was an entire experience that I hadn't touched on. And the reality is that, these are 90-second videos. And so you can't speak to every single experience. And I really liked when people add those comments. I mean, sometimes they're a little hostile, but I really like when they chime in and kind of talk about like how what they went through in the 80s had nothing to do with what I just said these other men were going through in the 80s. So yeah, it's been really interesting.
I need to maybe
comment. Read the comments if you dare. Yes.
Yeah, but that is interesting. I mean, we all do have, different experiences. You made me think when the way I think you said somebody attacks you, but it's sort of like, to me, that person needs therapy because they haven't sort of, talked it out, or, they're getting that hostile in a reaction that, they might need to talk to someone.
I do often think that. I do often wonder that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so just, what comes to mind when I say some of these topics, gay millennials, what was broadly?
So when I was talking about that, this came out of conversations I had with some friends, because I'm an elder millennial. I'm a geriatric millennial, I guess. So I was born in 1982. So I'm just kind of at the far end. Yeah, I know. But you hear me? I'm a geriatric millennial. So so a lot of people, when I posted this, were a lot of younger people were rolling their eyes and being like, that was not my experience. But I've been talking to men my age, friends and acquaintances, and we were talking about the kind of whiplash of being 40 and gay, specifically in a city like New York. Mm-hmm. But I think just being 40 and gay in the world, when we were kids, it was still, the worst thing you could be called on the playground was gay. And most of us were called gay. But still, it was also just a really kind of offhand thing to be like, science class is so gay. What? Like that was part of the vernacular. So it was still that. And then as we got older, there was still intense shame around and stigma around being gay. I don't think I was aware of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, but I knew that at the highest level, this was like 92-ish that went in. So I was 10 years old. And so I have some awareness that, like, at the highest level of my government, it's still not okay to talk about your sexuality if you're gay. It's not okay to admit it. Then I get older and I, see ads for movies like Philadelphia, and like, okay, so if you're gay, it means you're dying of AIDS. Then I get older and I see that there are just a few options of how to be gay in the world. You can be like Eric McCormick on Will and Grace and like not ever have sex or like get close to a man. You can be like those guys on Queer as Folk who are having sex all the time and who are always doing drugs and are just kind of living this like seedy life that seems so far away from me. Yeah. And then there was like the Tom Hanks, version where you're like nobly dying of AIDS. And so this was like a terrifying thing to ponder. And then the same year, I'm just going on now because this is just mind blowing to me. The same year that Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed was the year that marriage equality was passed in New York. So here I am, like a person in my 20s living in New York City, and all of a sudden it's legal to get married. And I was living with a boyfriend at the time. All of a sudden people are asking us if we're going to get married. And my whole life I had grown up. I mean, I didn't come out till I was 18, but okay. So that was like 10 years of living as an open gay man, never thinking about getting married. And all of a sudden there it was, this option. And then people got married. Almost everybody I know started getting married. And then most of them got divorced very soon after that. And they reemerged from their divorces, from their marriages, into the gay world. And it's completely a different landscape. It's a different planet than the one they inhabited when they got married. Now, like, the apps were not around, and now they are the way to communicate. The party drugs are consumed in a very different and more conspicuous way than they ever were before. Thruples and polyamory are such a thing out in the open, whereas they really, I mean,
No, they were not.
They were not. I mean, they were happening, but they were not out in the world and discussed and normalized in the way that they are wonderfully today. But we are experiencing whiplash. So a lot of, I don't know if I really even got to any of that in my post, because you saw how long it just took me to get through that. But that was the impetus behind wanting to talk about what is it really like for us now, and like, are we okay? You know, do we have our feet underneath us at all?
Yeah, I mean, you know, yeah, and I'm, you know, like I said, in the 80s, I mean, there was nothing, you know, and being called gay definitely was happening.
Of course.
And Jewish jokes, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, that still happens, and that's a whole other thing.
Well, but yes, but I mean, then it was, you know, I was telling you, you know, to talk about shame. I mean, shame plays such a big role in the LGBTQ plus experience, and I think of myself growing up in the 80s. You know, luckily, my mother asked me if I was gay, so I was very blessed.
Yeah.
When I was just graduating college-ish. My dad never knew, and he was 10 years older. He wouldn't have understood, different generation. But I was petrified. You know, I would run in, you know, park the car at a gay bar and run inside to avoid being seen. Took me many years after that to tell straight friends. When people asked what religion or nationality I was, I would make them guess, because I wouldn't admit to being Jewish. So I think I, without knowing, had shame surrounding me from all of that.
Yeah, I know. I feel that very deeply, and you know, it really resonates with me. I grew up also, you know, around a lot of Jewish people in Maryland. Not at the school I went to, but you know, I was going to Hebrew school, and our neighborhoods were very Jewish. But still, I think it's, you know, it's inherited. You know, it's generational, intergenerational trauma that you inherit. I would still go places where I realize I'm about to admit to being Jewish, or something is about to reveal me being Jewish, and it's going to alter the way that the person I'm talking to is thinking about me. That's a real thing. And it's very connected to the way I feel about being gay. You know, I'm so openly gay in my life, obviously, and online, and, you know, everywhere. And there are still those moments where you feel it in your bones, like, oh, this is about to alter the way this person views me. And I don't think we're making that up. I don't think that's, you know, me telling myself a story. I think it's backed up with data, with our lived experience.
And where does all the shame come from? I mean, I'm sure it's different for everybody.
It's different for everybody, and it's the same for everybody. You know, the great definition of shame that I always come back to is it's different from guilt, because guilt is thinking I did something bad. Shame is feeling I am bad. Something intrinsic to me is bad. And so there's so much research around shame as this kind of primal emotion. It's like lives way back in our lizard brain. So, you know, back when we were living in the jungle as primates or whatever, if we were different from our tribe, there was a good chance we were going to be cast out of our tribe. And that means losing protection, losing food, losing shelter, losing, you know, community, losing love. And the idea is that lives in us intensely, as if it's happening now. Our brains often don't know the difference. So I talk to a lot of my clients who have had similar experiences to what I had. Grew up in loving families, very close knit, and very just, celebrating who I was. I was tap dancing around my house when I was 4 and 5. Like, my parents loved it. It was never like, stop being who you are. But the world outside of my house gave me a very different message. Like I said, on the playground, I knew that I was very soft and sensitive and all these things. So I knew I was different, even though I didn't know what that meant. And that I'm finding, because I talk to friends, but also with my clients, like that fundamental understanding that they were different. And I'm actually envious in some ways of men I know who knew they were gay when they were 4 years old. Was that your experience?
No, I mean, that's what's so interesting, Brian. People ask, when did I know I was gay? Honestly, I had sexual experiences in high school, but I don't know, because there was no one to speak to about it. There was nothing I was watching on television. I couldn't go to the internet to research. So I don't have an understanding. I don't have like that moment. I had those experiences. I know those existed. But I don't.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's a lot. It's muddy. It's muddy for a lot of us. It's muddy for me in a lot of ways, because it was just so confusing for so long. And everything's confusing when you're an adolescent. Everything. So to have that on top of it,
is a confusing time for everybody. But I think you're talking of you coming out in the 80s or 90s. And for me the 80s, and you started to have Will and Grace and Ellen and these things. I mean, there was soap, and somebody pointed out, which I was 10 when this episode I think aired. There's an episode of Family. I don't know if you know that series. It was Christy McNichol and Meredith Baxter from Family Ties, part of a family unit, and the brother had a gay friend who was arrested, I think, at a bar. And it's a great episode, and it is online. I'll send you the link, because it is a great from 1976. But I was 10, I think, when that aired, so I wouldn't have really, but you just didn't have a place to talk to anybody. And then, you mentioned growing up in a Jewish community. Unfortunately, I didn't feel that my area was Jewish. I've spoken to somebody who now lives in Israel, is married to a Jewish, they have lived in Israel for over 30 years. And she sort of felt the same way. Like, we felt very different in our town, which I think, add that to the gay, it's a lot, when you're young and when you're trying to figure yourself out. And and then you even mentioned the intergenerational trauma, being a child of Holocaust survivors, who were used to hiding things.
Right. And I think I remember you telling me in an earlier conversation about the silence surrounding all that.
I mean, there was and there wasn't. I mean, I always knew, but I also don't think I because I wasn't surrounded. I am envious, like you said, being envious of some others, envious of kids who went to Jewish camps, because I think they formed that relationship with other Jewish kids that I am sure helped them understand their Jewish lived experience.
Yeah. I think that's right. I didn't, but I went to Hebrew school, and I also had.
But I didn't want to, because everyone else went to Catholic school. And Sunday school. They were always going to church, so it was it's just. It's fascinating. I love how you said, I've always, it bothers me that I don't have that, knew I was gay moment.
Yeah.
I'm amazed at the, we have dear neighbors across the street, and one of their nephews, I think, is like 9, and told his parents, and they're loving him and accepting him, and it's a makes me so happy. Michael is commenting. He says, as a gay gentleman in my late 50s with a little family, my therapist tells me to make changes, but I am a creature of habit. I've become unable to make decisions about my future. And his first experience with therapy, he wrote, is conversion therapy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's so painful to hear, and not nearly, I think, as painful as going through it. It's interesting, the idea of being stuck. So many people come to therapy with that idea, that feeling of being stuck, stuck in their habits, stuck in a life they don't want to live anymore, stuck in a marriage, stuck in a job. And it really is, how do you move forward? And the not so simple answer to that is learning to differentiate. I mean, this is where the parts come in, learning to know the difference between when a part of you is speaking, and knowing when yourself is speaking. How can you become self-led? Because so often, I can take myself as an example. So dancing, I started dancing when I was 4. And so the part of me that wanted to be a dancer, and I still love dancing, but the part of me that wanted to be a dancer and needed something from being on stage is a very young part of me. It's been around for a long time. So getting to talk to that part of me, that very much younger part, and say, like, okay, so what is it that you need? How can I give you that? Me as this adult, as this capable, experienced adult, how can I give you what you need? And so I can kind of drive this car, because you don't want an 8-year-old driving your car. And so for a lot of people who are stuck somewhere, there's an 8-year-old driving their car, or many 8-year-olds fighting for the wheel. So that's not exactly like a how to get unstuck, but that's a place to begin, I think.
Thinking about it as that there's some other part of you, which might be that younger 4-year-old dancer, holding on for that.
Yeah, and especially for a lot of gay men, accessing who they are, I don't like to say authentic self, but yeah, that's it. Like, who you really are is very hard, because we hid it for so long. And if you went through conversion therapy, I mean, it was, squeezed, yourself was like squeezed away. And so we find all these different ways to try to access our authentic self, whether it means like we come into the gay world and we go wild and we party and we have sex constantly and we do whatever we need to do to be like, now I'm a gay man and I know who I am. And it's like, well, that's now part of who you are. And it's great to have those experiences. But that's not exactly the same as like getting to be self-led. So that is a very common experience for gay men, not having direct access to themselves.
And being stuck, is it a common?
I think that's a common human experience, but specifically for gay men, it's complicated. It's complicated.
Gay men are complicated.
They really tend to be. Yeah.
There is no doubt, but the hiding part is what I find, because I said to you, I would run into the club. I didn't want to, I was afraid of being seen.
Right.
I didn't offer up that I was a Jewish gay man. It took me so long to just readily admit that and say that out loud and be proud of that.
Right. Right.
And
so those parts that were afraid are still there. They're still afraid. And you've navigated around them. You have managers coming in and helping you like get through, but the managers are parts too.
And sadly, we're living in a time where it's sort of becoming scary to say those things again.
Yeah, it is. It truly is. It truly is.
Both of those things, unfortunately, you know.
Yeah, depending on where you are and who you're talking to, it can be a really it's very strange, and how deeply this is the intergenerational thing. Whenever anything happens, anti-Semitic, anything anti-Jewish, it happens. I see it on the news, and I feel like they're coming for me and my family. It's that immediate for me, and for most of the Jewish people I know, it feels that immediate. So yeah, there's no way to overstate how scary it is right now.
Yeah, it really, yeah, there is not. The one blessing I find is I'm thrilled my parents are not alive to sort of witness this again. Because I couldn't imagine what those conversations would be like. I mean, that's a whole other topic. I'm just, it's a powerful thing. Thank you for sharing about the unstuck, because that was sort of the same question I was mentioning backstage for my friend who, feels, he climbs to the top of the mountain and gets knocked back down. And I love how you explain that. Dancing, from 3 to 23, you were always sure that you wanted to be a Broadway dancer. Where did that begin? And that I am very jealous of that, because I dancing is like my freeing space for me.
Really?
I'm not a trained, but I have put me on a dance floor, and it's my heaven. It's my heaven.
I certainly get that. That's what it always was for me. It was always this freedom.
But at 3, I can't say that at 3 for me. So where did it begin?
Well, our household was steeped in musical theater. The way my dad grew up, he comes from a very musical family, and his grandfather was a cantor in the temple. His mother was a classical pianist, and they were just raised with Rodgers and Hammerstein and Lerner and Lowe playing on the turntable. And so we were raised that way too. So musicals were just always part of our language growing up as a family. And so the movie musicals were always on the TV. We would watch them as a family. And my dad was always doing community theater or Gilbert and Sullivan. He's a lawyer, so I don't know how he found the time, but he did. And we would, if my mom was working and we didn't get a babysitter, we would go with my dad to his rehearsals. So it was very much, and all 3 of us, I have a younger brother and an older sister. My sister studied classical voice at Oberlin. My brother, like me, studied musical theater at the University of Michigan. Neither of them perform anymore, but it's still how we speak to each other. It's still our common language. So I started dancing just with that. And I also followed my sister to theater camp. She was going to theater camp. And I went with her when I was 4. And that's just all I ever did. There was a lot of angst.
You never looked back.
Well, I did, because I was an angsty kid, and I just was always thinking like, oh God, is this the right thing? Is it my freshman year at Michigan, I was studying musical theater and kind of being like, oh, but I should write. Oh, this is not for me. There was a lot of angst along the way. And even as soon as I got my Broadway show, which is what I had always wanted, I immediately thought, oh, okay, now what am I going to do? Like, I need to figure out what else I'm going to do. So it wasn't always so clear. But nevertheless, dancing was always my escape button.
And so I know Broadway dance is different than the dance. Do you go out dancing as well? Like, does that give you joy?
It's not the same. I'm in my element at a wedding and a bar mitzvah, that kind of thing.
Totally. Me too. I rule the dance floor at those.
Yeah. Maybe I rule a little too tyrannically, but I don't really love to go out dancing. And I have certainly quite a lot in my time as a gay man in New York City. But that's another kind of subset of gay men that I really envy. I have a lot of those friends who are Broadway dancers or, you know, contemporary dancers, whatever they do. And they'll do a show and then go from doing the show to the club or to the circuit party, whatever, and just lose their minds on the dance floor. And it takes a lot of alcohol to get me to that place.
Gotcha.
You know, the kind of freedom that I feel on stage is freedom within structure. You know, I have the choreography, I have the blocking, I know exactly what I'm going to do. And there's freedom in that for me. They're just kind of jumping around on the dance floor. It doesn't feel the same. Again, I wish I did.
You mentioned Broadway being what you always wanted to do, but do I have it correct? It was Chicago that you always wanted to do.
Yeah. It was very specific.
I mean, that is, yeah, it's not just I want to get on Broadway.
Mm-hmm. The dream was to do a bunch of Broadway shows. I wanted to be one of those chorus boys who went from show to show to show. That really was the dream. But Chicago, I first saw Chicago when I was 14. The first national tour came to DC in 1997 or 1998. And you know, my mind just went kablooey. I mean, just, you know, it was one of those, it was a life-changing moment. And I thought that is what I want to do. And so from then on, you know, I was performing with these high school groups and everything. And I would videotape any Chicago performance that was on, you know, the Rosie O'Donnell show, or, you know, then the next year Fosse came out and I recorded that. And, you know, I started learning all of the choreography and learning all the vocabulary. And then I started studying with Anne Reinking and Gwen Verdon, who created, you know, who were Fosse's proteges. And so I was we came back from the pandemic and we started doing all that jazz from Chicago. And I realized, oh my God, I've been doing this choreography since I was 14. Oh, there we are. That's me. That's me a long time ago. That's also me.
That's incredible. I have to tell you, I definitely saw Chicago on Broadway, and I can't remember. It might have been with BB originally. Who knows? And my seats were not great.
Mm-hmm.
But I was in London with a friend in '95, I think, and we just went up to the Chicago box office in London, and we got fifth row center to see Uta Lemper
and Ruthie Henschel. Oh, it would have been
and
90,
I was blown away being that close and experiencing that.
It was, you know, it's still a good show. So I went, you know, I retired now. I'm retired. And I retired a year and a half ago. But last week they called me.
I know.
And said, we really need you. Yeah. And I was like, yes, I can do it. And so I was thrilled because when I left, I really thought I was leaving. I really thought I was done. But then being done was really hard. It was really hard after an entire lifetime of being on stage. All of a sudden,
is a lifetime.
Well, 15 years, but then all of the years leading up to that, where I was always performing, always. And so all of a sudden, I was doing something that was very different. I was sitting across from people, and it's not quite the same, but I was their audience in a lot of ways. You know, I was holding space for them, and I had never, you know, I felt like it was payback. You know, my sister and my brother being like, all those years you made us watch you, you know, tap dance in the living room. I all of a sudden didn't have an audience anymore. And I never knew how important that was, to have that release in front of people. I never knew how important that was. So anyway, so I went back last week, and it was so fun. It was so much fun. It was more fun than I'd had in years, because there wasn't any pressure on it anymore. Any kind of thought of, oh God, am I here too long? How long is this going to last? You know, is my body going to give out before the show closes?
And
you know,
you're not relying on that paycheck.
Right. So it was a very different
difference. Yeah, no pressure. Yeah. No pressure. Is it true you used to fake illnesses to watch Fred Astaire and Gene Kelly on?
Where are you finding this information? Did I write about this? I did.
You did. Or there was an interview. I don't.
Are you reading the McSweeney's columns? Is that what you found?
Yes, I found your chronicles.
Yeah, my Chorus Boy Chronicles. Yeah. Oh, thanks.
Yeah, which I want. talk about the Chorus Boy Chronicles. Well, first of all, where did your love of writing? And they are phenomenal. They're really good. I love them.
Thanks. I really liked writing them. I started writing because I went to a school called the Waldorf School, or sometimes they're called the Steiner Schools, and writing was just part of our everyday curriculum, creative writing. So that started as early as I can remember. When I was at Michigan doing musical theater, I was also getting a minor in creative writing, and I just liked it. I always liked it. And I was writing essays, and I was writing kind of, auto fiction. So then when I went to school for writing, I won this contest with McSweeney's, where they give a column to a young writer or a couple of young writers every year, and you contribute. You don't get paid, but you get this great exposure. So essentially, the year after I graduated from Columbia, I wrote every other week. I wrote these essays, and so I wrote a book and just kind of put it online. And they were, I think my brother came up with the idea of the Chorus Boy Chronicles. I didn't know what I wanted to write about it, and I don't know what to call it. And I think he came up with it. And it's just a great title. And I thought, okay, I'll just write about what it's like to be a chorus boy. And I really enjoyed doing it. It was really kind of the beginning, if I think about it, the beginning of what I'm doing now, really examining the life and the foibles and fables, and
Well, there's a lot of interesting things. I mean, showing up at the door where you thought it was the interview with the guy and was the wrong guy. I mean, that was something.
That was a true story. They're all true stories. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, really good. Put them into a book. Would you still like to write a book?
I would. And that's actually the reason I started doing the Instagram posts. That was the other reason, is because I really want to write about the work I'm doing with my clients, because it's so specific to us. And like I said, I have straight women, I have gay women, I have straight men, I have non-binary, I have trans clients. But the bulk of my work is with these gay men, whom I cannot help but see myself in, and can't help but see my friends and my community in. And everybody is unique. Everybody has their own experience, and then there are all these commonalities. So what I'm writing about, what I'm currently writing about, is my work with my clients. Which is a dicey thing. You have to get permission from your clients. You have to.
But are you writing an essay, or you want to write a book about?
I'm hoping to write a book. I'm in the very beginning stages of that. So we
need more LGBTQ, help.
I think we do. I really think we do. Yeah. So that's the goal.
Well, and not only you're living it every day as well, not just taking it or getting it from the clients. I mean,
right.
You go through life where
right. Yeah, so far all I've written, because I haven't started talking to my clients about this yet, so we'll see if any of them are watching this. But so far I'm just writing about my own experience. I'm not talking about the case studies yet, because there's no way.
You had me at Cadbury cream egg, by the way, in the one. What? You mentioned a Cadbury cream egg, and my husband and I love those. You didn't eat them.
I didn't eat them.
You didn't eat them, but you were talking about them.
I have no memory of this. It
caught my eye immediately. You were talking about your dad. I love the fact that he used to coach you too.
Yeah, my dad is wonderful. He's the best straight man that a gay boy could ever have, as a father, because he really. He's such a gentle, artistic soul. His college majors. If he watches this, he's just gonna blush. His college majors. He majored in oboe and French, and then he went to grad school to become a social worker. And then he worked in social work for a few years, and this is like 1975. And he felt like he wasn't making an impact, and so he went back to law school. So my dad and I, a lot of who I am comes from my dad. But I think that what you're referring to is one summer I was in Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, and I was playing the Pharaoh role, which is like this Elvis inspired character. And my dad like coached me on it, and I remember he always coached me on my lines, and whenever I was in a show, but especially when I was younger. I was like 10 when I did that show, and he was coaching me on like how to how the moves, and like how to like be still, and like and it's just, yeah, he was great. And my mom just kind of sat back and was
As a
just kind
gay
of like,
man, that
what
is a
is going on?
blessing in and of
Oh
itself.
yeah, very much so.
In and of itself. Before I let you go, was your coming out relatively easy?
No. Listen, I mean, my parents were great. My dad was immediately supportive, and my mom was surprised. It was kind of
which is not always. It's
no,
really,
yeah. I mean, my mom got, she got on board real quick. But she was surprised,
there's no choice, but
yeah, yeah. Well,
I mean, there is.
yeah,
Yeah.
not everybody gets on board.
I mean, Michael ended up, who wrote to us earlier, in conversion therapy. I mean, I hope that wasn't.
Yeah, no, exactly. It happens all too often, and still. And I was incredibly lucky that my friends and my community and my family all, my extended family all just opened their arms and were like, yeah, great, Um, and what I'm finding is that there are very much still men today who have trouble coming out in their 30s, in their 40s. I don't work with any adolescents, but there's this idea that now it's all different and it's all easy, and there's no more stigma, and it's all acceptance and love, and that is just well, it's true in some places, but even if you have that acceptance, which I did, and even if your school has a gay straight alliance, which mine did not, but which most schools do now, it doesn't mean you haven't ingested that stigma. That internalized shame is still with you, because we live in the world, and the world by and large is hostile to queer people. So it's still, it's still a major struggle too. And that was, you were asking me about the therapy tips, for gay men. And I, in those Instagram videos, I often will kind of generalize because they're so short. And there is no right or wrong way to do therapy. So, I will just say that. But one thing I said in there is, don't skip over your coming out story.
I went back to just look, and I knew exactly how that was going to tie.
Yeah.
Don't skip over your coming out.
So many people do now, because they feel like, it's just a trope. Like, like this old story. Everybody has their coming out story, and it's hard, but it's really vital. It's really formative. It's part of who we are.
Well, you said it. There are so many men and women still struggling who are married to a woman or a man, and they don't want to be, but they don't know how to, and it was so interesting. You said like your mom took a minute. Here I had my mom who asked, and it still took me years later to tell friends the fear that they would not still be my friend was so, I remember, and when I finally told my girlfriend Rena at I don't know, like a Bennigan's or a Houlihan's, struggling to get it out, and I finally did it, and she just was like, it's about time, like she knew, but,
was that feel good to you when she said that?
Oh yeah. And then it was to sort of you let that relief go. But this is I'm not kidding. I think my mother asked me when I graduated college, so 2021, and I still took me maybe 9 years to tell. I might not have told her till I was 30.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing is that is not a bygone era. That still happens. I guarantee. I'm seeing it myself. And
well, that's why you said it earlier. It is so astounding and gives me such hope to see the young kids who can feel accepted by their mothers and fathers and families to say, I am gay and I am proud of it.
Yeah. There is hope.
There is. Brian, this was so enjoyable. Thank you
really a pleasure
for sharing, your expertise and keep doing those videos.
Thank you. I really appreciate you reaching out. This was really kind. Thank you. Thank you.
You're so welcome. Stay in touch.
Absolutely. Take care.
You too. Thanks, everybody, for joining. If you'd like more information about Brian, the link is up below. It's Brian Spitulnik, SPITULNIK.com. Please join me tomorrow when Emmy Award winner Kevin Spiritus stops by to tell us about the final season of After Forever. If you haven't yet subscribed to my YouTube channel, you can do so down below. If you like today's episode, which I hope you do, you click the little like button. It always helps. And if you like to stream audio versions, you can search the Locker Room on your favorite streaming platform. Have a great afternoon, everybody. As always, thanks for watching and stay safe. I will see you tomorrow.